The morning sun streamed through the dusty blinds of Daniel Thompson's small bedroom, casting golden stripes across the cracked walls. The sounds of the city waking up filtered through the thin windows: car horns, distant chatter, and the rhythmic barking of a neighborhood dog. But inside their modest apartment, the world was quieter, softer. "Rise and shine, sweetheart," his mother's warm voice called from the kitchen. The smell of sizzling eggs and buttered toast drifted through the tiny space, making Daniel's stomach rumble. He pushed aside the worn blanket and stretched, blinking sleep from his eyes. Posters of basketball legends, their faces creased from years of admiration, lined his walls. They were his heroes, their determination a constant reminder of what he dreamed to become. He dressed quickly in his neatly pressed school uniform, the fabric faded but clean, his mother's hard work evident in every stitch. As he stepped into the kitchen, Lisa Thompson, already in her waitress uniform, smiled at him with tired but loving eyes. She planted a gentle kiss on his forehead, smoothing his curly hair. "Eat up, baby! You've got a big day ahead," she said, placing a plate in front of him. Daniel dug in, savoring every bite. "Thanks, Mom. It's perfect," he said, his smile flashing a gap where a tooth had recently fallen out. Lisa rested a hand on his cheek. "Remember, honey, it's not what we have, but who we are that matters." He nodded, his young face solemn with understanding. "I know, Mom. I'll make you proud." After breakfast, Daniel grabbed his backpack and headed outside. The morning air was crisp, the city stirring to life. He waved at old Mr. Johnson, who rocked on his porch, his coffee steaming in the cool air. A few steps later, he high-fived his best friend Jamal, who was already bouncing a basketball on the cracked pavement. The streets were alive with the familiar sights of his neighborhood: the corner store with its hand-painted sign, the small park where kids shot hoops on rusted rims, and the community center where his mother sometimes worked extra shifts. The buildings were worn, but the people made them vibrant. As he walked, Daniel rehearsed multiplication tables under his breath, his mind focused on the upcoming math test. He kicked a stray pebble along the sidewalk, his backpack balancing with each step. But then, something caught his eye, a dark shape lying near the curb, half hidden beneath a crisp autumn leaf. His steps slowed. Curiosity prickled through him as he bent down, brushing the leaf aside. His fingers closed around smooth, expensive leather. It was a wallet, thick, heavy. Daniel's heartbeat quickened as he turned it over in his hands. The leather was rich, polished, nothing like the worn wallets he'd seen before. Glancing around, he saw no one searching for it. His fingers trembled slightly as he pried it open. Inside, crisp $100 bills stared back at him. Daniel's breath caught. He had never seen so much money in one place before. His mind raced. What could this buy? New sneakers, a warm coat for his mom, maybe even a real basketball hoop for the neighborhood kids. Then, his mother's voice echoed in his head. "It's not what we have, but who we are." Daniel swallowed hard and flipped through the wallet, searching for an ID. His eyes widened when he read the name on the card: Thomas Carter. He knew that name. Everyone did. Mr. Carter was a millionaire, one of the wealthiest businessmen in the city. His face had been in magazines, his name spoken in admiration and sometimes resentment in places like Daniel's neighborhood. Daniel exhaled slowly. A man like Mr. Carter probably wouldn't even notice a missing wallet, but that wasn't the point. Integrity wasn't about who would notice, it was about doing the right thing, even when no one was looking. His fingers curled around the wallet as he made his decision. He wouldn't keep it. He couldn't. With a deep breath, he zipped it securely into his backpack and turned on his heel. He was supposed to be heading to school, but that could wait. Returning the wallet was more important. The downtown skyscraper where Mr. Carter's company was located loomed far in the distance, its glass windows glinting in the morning sun. It was a mile away, maybe more, but Daniel didn't hesitate. He walked with purpose, his small frame cutting through the morning crowd. The city pulsed around him, commuters rushing to work, shopkeepers rolling up metal grates, the scent of fresh bread wafting from a bakery. A few people gave him curious glances, perhaps wondering why a boy his age wasn't in school, but Daniel didn't care. He kept walking, determination in his stride. By the time he reached the towering skyscraper, his palms were sweaty. He craned his neck, staring up at the building that seemed to touch the sky. Everything about it was intimidating, the sleek glass, the polished stone, the expensive cars pulling up to the curb. Wealth clung to this place like a second skin. Daniel swallowed hard, adjusting his backpack straps. He was just a kid from the other side of town. What if they didn't believe him? What if they thought he stole it? Pushing past the fear, he stepped forward and pulled open the heavy glass door. The lobby swallowed him whole, vast and gleaming. Marble floors stretched endlessly beneath a chandelier that sparkled like 1,000 stars. Well-dressed men and women moved with purpose, their conversations clipped and confident. Daniel felt small, out of place in his scuffed sneakers and second-hand jacket. He approached the front desk, clearing his throat. The receptionist, a woman with sleek hair and sharp eyes, looked up, her expression unreadable. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone polite but puzzled. Daniel tightened his grip on the straps of his backpack. I need to see Mr. Thomas Carter," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. Her eyebrows arched. "Do you have an appointment?" He shook his head. "No, ma'am. But I found his wallet. I wanted to return it to him." For a moment, the woman just stared at him. Then, her expression softened, a hint of admiration flickering in her eyes. "That's very honest of you, young man. Let me see what I can do." As she picked up the phone, Daniel exhaled, nerves tangling in his stomach. His gaze wandered around the luxurious lobby. Everything was so pristine, so different from home. He thought of his mother again, how out of place she would feel here, just like he did. A few minutes later, the receptionist hung up. "Mr. Carter will see you," she said with a small smile. "Take the elevator to the 30th floor. His assistant will meet you there." Daniel nodded, his heart pounding as he moved toward the elevator. As the doors slid shut and the numbers climbed higher and higher, a single thought echoed in his mind. What if this changes everything? Behind a massive mahogany desk, surrounded by towering shelves of books and gleaming awards, sat Mr. Thomas Carter, a man of power, wealth, and influence. His sharp blue eyes, used to scanning through million-dollar contracts, now rested on something far simpler yet far more profound. A young boy standing in his office, clutching a wallet. Slowly, Mr. Carter rose to his feet, his expensive suit shifting with his movements. He studied the boy with quiet intrigue before speaking. "So, you're the honest young man who found my wallet?" His voice was deep, commanding, a tone that filled boardrooms and dictated the course of businesses. It made men straighten their backs and listen. But Daniel Thompson, standing small in his worn sneakers, did not cower. His hands trembled slightly as he reached into his backpack and pulled out the sleek black leather wallet. "Yes, sir," he said, his voice steady despite his nerves. "I found it on the sidewalk this morning. I knew I had to return it to you." Mr. Carter stepped around his desk, his polished shoes making no sound on the plush carpet. He took the wallet from Daniel's hands, flipping it open with practiced ease. For a moment, his eyes flickered over the contents, the cash, the credit cards, everything untouched. He let out a small, impressed exhale before returning his gaze to the boy. "Everything seems to be in order," he mused. Then, as if seeing Daniel in a new light, he asked, "What's your name, son?" "Daniel Thompson, sir," Daniel replied, standing a little straighter. Mr. Carter's brow arched slightly. "Daniel Thompson," he repeated, rolling the name over his tongue as if committing it to memory. "Tell me, Daniel, why did you return it? There was quite a bit of cash in here. You could have kept it, and no one would have known." Daniel hesitated for only a moment before meeting Mr. Carter's gaze head-on. "Because it was the right thing to do, sir. My mom always taught me to be honest, no matter what." A beat of silence passed between them, thick with unspoken words. Something shifted in Mr. Carter's expression, a softness breaking through the carefully composed features of a man used to dealing with cynicism and self-interest. He walked back to his chair and sat down, gesturing toward the seat across from him. "That's quite admirable, Daniel. Not many people would have done what you did." Daniel perched on the edge of the luxurious leather chair, his feet barely brushing the ground. He felt out of place in this world of wealth, but Mr. Carter's words filled him with a quiet pride. The businessman opened a drawer, pulling out a thick checkbook. He flipped it open, pen poised. "I'd like to offer you a reward for your honesty. You deserve it." Daniel's eyes widened. He swallowed hard, then shook his head firmly. "Oh, no, sir. I can't accept that," he said, his voice slightly tremulous but resolute. "I didn't bring the wallet back for a reward. I did it because it was the right thing to do." Mr. Carter's pen hovered over the paper, his expression unreadable. "Are you sure? This is a substantial amount of money. It could help you and your family." For a split second, the temptation flickered. He thought about his mother, working double shifts just to keep the lights on. He imagined the relief in her tired eyes if he came home with money that could ease their struggles, even just a little. But then he remembered her words, "Honesty isn't a trade, Daniel. It's who we are." Daniel inhaled deeply, meeting Mr. Carter's gaze with unwavering conviction. "I'm sure, sir. Thank you, but I can't take money for doing what's right." For a long moment, Mr. Carter simply stared at him. Then, a slow, rare smile broke across his face. He set the pen down and stood once more, extending a firm hand. "Well, Daniel Thompson, you've certainly given me something to think about today. Thank you for returning my wallet. Your honesty is refreshing and admirable." Daniel stood as well, shaking the man's hand with the firm grip his mother had taught him. "You're welcome, sir. I'm just glad I could help." As he left the office, stepping back into the world of towering skyscrapers and hurried professionals, Daniel felt lighter. The overwhelming grandeur of the building that had once intimidated him now felt different, less imposing, more like just another place in the city. He had done the right thing, and that was all that mattered. The long walk back to school didn't bother him. His feet moved swiftly, his mind replaying the conversation over and over. He couldn't wait to tell his mom, though he wouldn't make a big deal out of it. It wasn't about praise or recognition. It was just about being who he was. But fate had other plans. As Daniel neared his school, the sight of a sleek black sedan and a police cruiser parked out front sent a ripple of whispers through the students gathered by the windows. The hushed murmurs spread like wildfire. Why are the police here? Who are they looking for? Inside, classrooms buzzed with curiosity. Teachers exchanged questioning glances, while students craned their necks, trying to catch a glimpse of what was happening outside. Then, the door to Daniel's classroom swung open. Standing there in his sharp suit was Mr. Thomas Carter, and beside him, a uniformed police officer. A stunned silence fell over the room. Daniel froze in his seat, his heart slamming against his ribs. A million thoughts raced through his mind, none of them making sense. Had he done something wrong? Why were they here? Mr. Carter's eyes locked onto Daniel's, and a knowing smile curved his lips. "Daniel Thompson," he said, his voice carrying through the room, "could you step outside for a moment?" Johnson stepped out of his patrol car, his polished boots hitting the pavement with a solid thud. Behind him, Mr. Carter emerged from his sleek black sedan, adjusting the cuffs of his expensive suit as he surveyed the school. An unlikely pair, the authoritative officer and the distinguished businessman, walking side by side through the school's entrance, sent an immediate ripple of excitement through the building. Teachers exchanged curious glances, students whispered furiously among themselves, and the office staff sat up a little straighter as the two men strode purposefully toward the principal's office. Inside Daniel's classroom, the air was thick with the scent of dry erase markers and the quiet murmurs of students struggling through a math problem. Mrs. Davis had just finished writing an equation on the board when a firm knock echoed through the room. The class fell silent. Every head turned as the door creaked open, revealing Principal Rodriguez. Her expression was unreadable, a mixture of seriousness and something else, something almost excited. "Excuse me, Mrs. Davis," she said, her voice measured but brimming with an underlying urgency. "Could you please send Daniel Thompson to my office?" A hush fell over the classroom as all eyes snapped to Daniel. His stomach lurched. His fingers tightened around the edge of his desk. His mind raced. Had he done something wrong? Had he broken a rule without realizing it? Slowly, almost mechanically, he pushed his chair back, the legs scraping against the floor in the deafening silence. Mrs. Rodriguez hesitated for a beat, then added, "Bring your things with you, please." That was never a good sign. A few students exchanged nervous glances. Jake, Daniel's best friend, gave him a slight nod, but even he looked worried. Swallowing hard, Daniel grabbed his backpack and followed the principal out of the room, his legs feeling like they were made of lead. The hallway felt longer than ever, stretching endlessly before him. As they walked, Daniel's mind ran wild. Had something happened to his mom? Had his return of the wallet somehow caused trouble instead of helping? Then he saw it, the police car parked right outside the school's main entrance. His heart slammed against his ribs. He tried to breathe, but his throat felt tight. Was he in serious trouble? Had someone accused him of stealing? The mere thought sent a cold shiver down his spine. Through the glass partition of the principal's office, he saw them. Officer Johnson, Mr. Carter, other adults whose faces he didn't recognize. The tension in his chest coiled tighter. Mrs. Rodriguez placed a firm but reassuring hand on his shoulder. "It's okay, Daniel," she said gently. "You're not in trouble." But the dread in his gut didn't ease. It only twisted harder. As the door swung open, Daniel stepped inside, feeling every set of eyes land on him. The room felt suffocating, the air thick with something unspoken. Mr. Carter stood tall, his sharp gaze softening as he saw Daniel. A slow, warm smile spread across his face, but it did little to calm the pounding in Daniel's chest. Daniel swallowed hard and sat down, his small frame barely filling the oversized chair. His palms were sweaty. He clenched them into fists in his lap. He had to be brave. He had to be strong. The silence stretched. The adults exchanged glances. Daniel couldn't take it anymore. I didn't steal anything." The words burst out before he could stop them. His voice was shaky, his breath uneven. "I just wanted to help. I found the wallet and thought it was right to return it. I swear I didn't take anything." His vision blurred as tears threatened to spill over. He squeezed his eyes shut, embarrassed by the lump in his throat. He didn't want to cry, not here, not in front of all these important people. Mr. Carter's expression changed in an instant, shock, then concern, then something deeper. He knelt down in front of Daniel, his voice calm and steady. "Daniel, no. You're not in trouble." Officer Johnson took a step forward, his presence less intimidating now. "Son," he said, his voice warm, "we're here because of your good deed, Not because you did anything wrong. Mrs. Rodriguez crouched beside him, her hand gentle on his arm. Daniel, honey, take a deep breath, she soothed. Everything's okay. Mr. Carter just wanted to thank you properly for what you did. Daniel blinked up at them, his mind struggling to keep up. But why is there a police officer here? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Officer Johnson chuckled softly. Because what you did, Daniel, was extraordinary. And we think the whole school should know about it. Mr. Carter nodded. Your honesty deserves to be celebrated. And we're here to make sure it is. Daniel sat frozen, the weight of their words slowly sinking in. He wasn't in trouble. He wasn't in danger. They were here because of him? Because he had done something good? The tension in his shoulders eased. He wiped his sleeve across his eyes, sniffling. Really? Really? Mr. Carter confirmed with a proud smile. And if you're okay with it, we'd like to have a special assembly to share your story with your classmates. Daniel's heart raced, but this time, not out of fear. Out of something else, something lighter. Pride, excitement, disbelief. As he nodded, the adults exchanged satisfied smiles. This was just the beginning. The school bell rang, signaling the transition between classes, but in that small office, something much bigger had just begun. Mr. Carter's voice carried across the gymnasium, each word thick with emotion. In a world where it's easy to turn away, to think only of oneself, Daniel chose a different path. He chose honesty. He chose integrity. And that, my friends, deserves recognition. The gym fell silent. Hundreds of eyes locked onto Daniel, who stood motionless, his heart hammering against his ribs. He could feel the weight of their stares, the electric anticipation that crackled through the crowd like a live wire. Then, Mr. Carter took a deep breath, his gaze warm but determined. That is why I've decided to do something special, he announced, his voice strong but laced with something deeper, something that made Daniel's stomach clench with unease and excitement all at once. I want to ensure that Daniel's future is as bright as his character. So, I am making a pledge today. Daniel, I am sponsoring your education, all the way through college. A stunned hush filled the gymnasium, followed by a collective gasp that rippled through the crowd like a wave crashing onto shore. And then, an explosion of sound. The walls trembled under the force of thunderous applause. Shouts of excitement, gasps of disbelief, cheers that seemed to shake the very air around them. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. His mind raced, struggling to keep up with what was happening. He tried to form words, tried to comprehend the magnitude of what had just been said, but nothing came out. This had to be a dream. But Mr. Carter wasn't finished. He raised a hand, calling for silence. The noise dimmed, though the energy still vibrated in the air like the last few notes of a song. And that's not all, he continued. In honor of Daniel's integrity, I am establishing the Daniel Thompson Scholarship Fund. This fund will provide opportunities for other young people who demonstrate the same honesty and character that Daniel has shown today. The eruption of cheers was deafening. Students leaped to their feet, clapping wildly, shouting Daniel's name. His best friend Jake punched the air, beaming with pride. Even the teachers, usually composed and reserved, wiped at misty eyes and exchanged astonished glances. Principal Johnson, a man known for his stern demeanor, looked utterly moved as he stepped forward. Well, I think we can all agree that this is an extraordinary moment for our school, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Daniel, you've made us all incredibly proud today. The chant started in the back, soft at first, then growing, rising, until it filled every inch of space. Daniel! 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 He stood frozen, overwhelmed by the sheer force of their admiration. He wasn't used to this, wasn't used to being the center of attention. His eyes darted through the crowd, landing on familiar faces: his teachers, his classmates, the janitor who always gave him an extra carton of milk at lunch. And then there was his mother, standing at the front, tears streaming freely down her face, her hands clasped tightly together, as if she were holding back a flood of emotions. She was proud of him. He could see it in her eyes. And then something completely unexpected happened. Mr. Thompson, the no-nonsense history teacher, the one who barely cracked a smile even on good days, stood up and started a slow, deliberate clap. "This, students," he declared, his voice ringing through the gym, "is what true character looks like." The applause surged once more, a tidal wave of admiration and joy, shaking the very foundation of Lincoln Middle School. The celebration had only just begun. Then the principal's phone buzzed, interrupting the revelry. He glanced at the screen, his eyebrows lifting in surprise. He pressed the phone to his ear, nodded a few times, then hung up. Stepping back into the spotlight, he lifted a hand for silence. "It seems word travels fast," he announced, eyes twinkling with astonishment. "The local news station wants to cover this story." Daniel's stomach flipped. His pulse pounded in his ears. The news? This was really happening. Within an hour, Lincoln Middle School had transformed into a media hub. A news van pulled up outside, cameras and microphones at the ready. Reporters bustled into the school, setting up lights and adjusting sound equipment. The principal's office became an impromptu interview space, with Daniel and Mr. Carter seated in front of flashing cameras. Sarah Chin, the well-known local news anchor, smiled warmly at Daniel. "So, Daniel," she began, her voice smooth and inviting, "can you tell us what went through your mind when you found Mr. Carter's wallet?" Daniel swallowed hard. His hands were clammy, his nerves a tangled mess. But then he thought about his mom, about everything she had taught him. He straightened his shoulders. I just knew I had to return it," he said. "It was the right thing to do." As he spoke, his confidence grew. Mr. Carter chimed in, sharing how deeply moved he had been by Daniel's honesty. The reporter listened intently, her admiration evident. Meanwhile, outside the office, students pressed their faces against the windows, desperate to catch a glimpse of their suddenly famous classmate. Teachers attempted to shoo them away, but even they couldn't hide their own excitement. As the interview wrapped up, Sarah turned to the camera, her smile radiant. "In a world that sometimes seems filled with negativity, young Daniel Thompson reminds us that honesty and integrity still exist." This is Sarah Chin, reporting from Lincoln Middle School, where a simple act of kindness has made an extraordinary impact. The moment the news van pulled away, Daniel knew his life would never be the same. Mr. Carter sat in his office, surrounded by the symbols of his success, the dark mahogany desk, the shelves lined with awards, the framed certificates of his achievements. But his mind wasn't on any of it. He kept thinking about Daniel, his humble posture, the quiet strength in his eyes, the way he had never hesitated to do what was right. The boy's integrity had left an impression so deep that Mr. Carter knew one thing for certain: offering a scholarship wasn't enough. He had to do more. Much more. With newfound determination, he reached for his phone, dialing his most trusted financial advisors and legal team. His voice was firm, unwavering. "I want to establish a scholarship fund," he announced. "Not just for Daniel. There are other kids out there like him. Kids who have the potential to change the world, if only given the opportunity." From that moment on, Mr. Carter was a man on a mission. His days became a blur of meetings, paperwork, and phone calls. He pored over legal documents, scrutinized financial plans, and consulted with educators. This wouldn't be just any scholarship. It would be built on the principles that Daniel had demonstrated so effortlessly: honesty, kindness, and community spirit. Academic achievement was important, but character mattered more. The fund would reward students who, like Daniel, proved that integrity was worth more than money. But as Mr. Carter dove deeper into Daniel's story, he realized something troubling. The scholarship alone wouldn't be enough. Daniel's neighborhood, like so many others, was filled with kids full of potential, but lacking the resources to nurture it. What good was a scholarship if many of these children wouldn't even make it to graduation? They needed a safe space, a place where they could learn, grow, and build a future for themselves. "We need more than just a fund," Mr. Carter told his team during a late-night strategy session. "We need a community center." The room fell silent, his advisors exchanging glances. "A community center?" one of them asked hesitantly. "Yes," Mr. Carter affirmed. "A place where kids can come after school, where they can get help with their homework, learn new skills, and stay off the streets. We'll have a library, a computer lab, sports facilities, everything they need to thrive." The idea gained momentum fast. Mr. Carter personally visited Daniel's neighborhood, walking its streets, talking to parents, teachers, and local leaders. He asked them what they needed most. What would make the biggest difference? Slowly, the vision became clearer. The Daniel Thompson Community Center would be a beacon of hope, a place where children wouldn't just dream of a better future, but actually build one. The day of the groundbreaking ceremony arrived like a celebration. The air buzzed with excitement, a rare energy pulsing through the neighborhood. Residents lined the streets, eager to witness history in the making. The sun shone brilliantly, as if the universe itself approved of what was about to take place. Daniel stood at the front of the crowd, his heart pounding. He had never worn a shirt so crisp or seen so many important people gathered in one place. His mother stood beside him, clutching his hand, her eyes glistening with tears of joy. Then, Mr. Carter arrived. He looked sharp in his tailored suit, but with his sleeves rolled up, he was ready to work. He greeted Daniel warmly, then turned to address the crowd. "Today," he began, his voice steady and full of conviction, "we aren't just breaking ground on a building. We are laying the foundation for something far greater, a future built on integrity, on kindness, on opportunity." He paused, then smiled down at Daniel. "And who better to name it after than the young man who inspired it all?" A gasp rippled through the crowd as a large banner was unveiled. The bold letters read, "The Daniel Thompson Community Center." Daniel felt the breath leave his body. His name? On a building? He barely heard the deafening applause that followed, barely felt his mother's hands gripping his shoulders. His head swam, his vision blurred with disbelief. One by one, community leaders stepped up to the microphone, speaking of the impact the center would have. They spoke of the children who would now have a place to go, of the lives that would be changed, all because one boy made the choice to return a wallet. Then, Mr. Carter turned to Daniel once more. "Would you do the honors?" he asked, handing him a small silver shovel. Daniel hesitated for only a second before stepping forward. He gripped the shovel tightly, took a deep breath, and plunged it into the earth. The soil turned over beneath his hands. A single scoop of dirt. A simple act. And yet, it felt monumental. The crowd erupted in cheers, and for the first time, Daniel allowed himself to smile. As the noise died down, Mr. Carter looked at him thoughtfully. "Daniel," he said, "would you like to say a few words?" Daniel's stomach twisted. A speech? He hadn't prepared for this. He glanced at his mother, searching her face for reassurance. She gave him a small nod. Stepping up to the microphone, Daniel swallowed hard. Hundreds of eyes were on him. He took another deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. "Hi, everyone," he began, his voice shaky. I don't really know what to say. I never imagined I'd be standing here today." The crowd quieted, waiting. Encouraging. "I didn't think returning a wallet was a big deal. It was just the right thing to do." A murmur of agreement swept through the audience. Daniel felt his confidence growing. "But I guess I've learned that even the smallest decisions can change things," he continued. "This community center means the world to me, but it's not just for me. It's for all of us. For every kid who needs a safe place. For every family that needs hope." He turned to his mother, who was crying openly now. "My mom always taught me that kindness matters. That honesty matters. I just want to say thank you. Thank you for believing in me. Thank you for believing in the power of doing what's right." The moment he stepped back, the crowd exploded into applause. Mr. Carter clapped a hand on his shoulder, pride radiating from him. As the groundbreaking ceremony wrapped up, Mr. Carter turned to address the audience one final time. "One last thing," he announced. "In honor of Daniel's incredible integrity, I am establishing the Daniel Thompson Integrity Scholarship." The crowd gasped. Daniel felt his heart slam against his ribs. "This scholarship," Mr. Carter continued, "will be awarded every year to students who demonstrate honesty, kindness, and a commitment to doing what's right. It will cover full tuition, ensuring that those who embody the values Daniel has shown us all will have the opportunity to pursue their dreams." Daniel's mother broke down in sobs. Daniel himself felt frozen in place, the weight of what was happening settling onto his shoulders. Mr. Carter met his gaze. "Your one act of kindness, Daniel, has started something much bigger than you could have ever imagined." As Daniel looked out at the cheering crowd, the faces of his friends, his neighbors, his teachers, he realized something. He was no longer just a boy who had returned a wallet. He was the boy who had changed everything. Mrs. Rodriguez continued, her voice filled with admiration. "Daniel has not only brought honor to himself, but to our entire school and community. His actions remind us all of the power of integrity and the profound impact a single act of honesty can have." She then turned toward Daniel with a warm smile. "Daniel, would you please join me on stage?" The auditorium erupted into applause, the sound washing over Daniel like a tidal wave. His heart pounded against his ribs as he rose to his feet, his legs trembling with each step toward the stage. The lights above felt blinding, and the sea of faces staring up at him made his breath hitch. As he reached the podium, Mrs. Rodriguez presented him with a beautifully framed certificate, its golden border gleaming under the stage lights. "This certificate," she announced, holding it up for everyone to see, "is awarded to Daniel Thompson for his outstanding display of integrity and honesty." Another round of thunderous applause filled the room, and Daniel stood frozen, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He clutched the certificate in his hands, feeling a swell of emotions rise in his chest. Pride, humility, a strange sense of disbelief. He had only done what he believed was right, returning a lost wallet. Yet here he was, standing before his entire school, being recognized for it. He glanced toward his mother in the crowd, who sat with tears glistening in her eyes, her hands clasped together as if she were holding on to the moment itself. As weeks turned into months, Daniel found himself adjusting to the newfound recognition. At first, the attention had been overwhelming, but gradually he embraced the expectations that came with it. He no longer saw himself as just an ordinary boy. He was someone who could make a difference. With that realization came a quiet determination to live up to the faith others had placed in him. In the classroom, he raised his hand more often, eager to engage in discussions. His teachers noticed the change. He was no longer just a diligent student, but one who spoke with confidence and conviction. One afternoon, while sitting in the cafeteria, Daniel overheard a group of classmates discussing a local animal shelter struggling to stay afloat. Without hesitation, he approached them. "I'd love to help. What can I do?" he asked, his voice steady, his eyes filled with purpose. That Saturday, Daniel arrived at the shelter, rolling up his sleeves and diving into the work, cleaning cages, feeding the animals, and walking the dogs. Something inside him ignited. The joy of giving back, of being part of something bigger than himself, was unlike anything he had ever felt. That one act of service turned into a habit. Daniel sought out more opportunities to help. He joined the school's environmental club, dedicating weekends to neighborhood cleanups. He volunteered at the newly built community center, his community center, tutoring younger children who needed guidance. Word of his dedication spread, inspiring his peers. Slowly, a movement took shape. His classmates, inspired by his example, started joining in. The ripple effect of his actions was undeniable. His mother watched in quiet amazement. She had always known her son had a good heart, but to see him step into a role of leadership, to watch him embrace his ability to inspire change, it filled her with immeasurable pride. One evening, over dinner, she asked him, "How do you feel about everything, Daniel? The attention, the expectations?" Daniel thought for a moment, his fork idly pushing the food on his plate. Finally, he met her gaze. "At first, I was scared," he admitted. "I didn't know if I could be what everyone wanted me to be. But then I realized, I'm not trying to be someone else. I'm just being myself. I'm just doing what you always taught me, to be kind, to help others. It feels good, Mom. It feels right." As the months passed, Mr. Carter found himself returning to the community center time and time again. What had begun as a gesture of gratitude had evolved into something far greater. The center was no longer just a building. It was a second home to the children who walked through its doors. And for Mr. Carter, it had become a place of purpose. Every Tuesday and Thursday, he left his high-rise office early, trading his tailored suits for rolled-up sleeves and casual attire. The kids greeted him with excited smiles, eager for his guidance and wisdom. Mr. Carter didn't just donate money. He invested his time. He organized workshops on financial literacy, career planning, and entrepreneurship. He wanted these kids to see beyond their present struggles, to understand that their futures held limitless possibilities. And among all the young minds he mentored, it was Daniel who stood out the most. Their bond deepened with each passing week. Mr. Carter saw in Daniel a younger version of himself, driven, compassionate, and full of untapped potential. He took Daniel under his wing, not just as a student, but as a protege. After community center activities, they would sit and talk, discussing dreams and ambitions. Mr. Carter listened intently, offering advice and encouragement. And for Daniel, who had grown up without a father figure, those moments became priceless. Mr. Carter wasn't just a mentor, he was becoming family. One Saturday, as they cleaned up after a community event, Mr. Carter placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "You know," he said, his voice filled with warmth, "I'm proud of you. Not just for returning my wallet, but for everything you've done since then. You're a remarkable young man." A lump formed in Daniel's throat. He looked up at Mr. Carter, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," he said softly, "for everything." As time went on, their partnership flourished. Mr. Carter pushed Daniel to take on leadership roles, and Daniel rose to the challenge. One bright Saturday morning, during a neighborhood cleanup, Mr. Carter called out, "Daniel, why don't you take charge of the park cleanup crew?" Daniel's eyes widened. "Me? Are you sure?" "Absolutely," Mr. Carter said with a reassuring smile. "You've got what it takes. Just lead with the same kindness and integrity that brought you here." Taking a deep breath, Daniel nodded. As he assigned tasks and worked alongside his team, something shifted in him. The nerves faded, replaced by confidence. He could do this. He was meant to do this. Watching from a distance, Mr. Carter felt a deep sense of pride. Daniel wasn't just a good kid, he was a leader in the making. Later, as they sat on a park bench drinking lemonade, Mr. Carter turned to him. You did a fantastic job today. You're a natural leader. Daniel smiled, a genuine, beaming smile. Thanks, Mr. Carter. I learned from the best. Mr. Carter chuckled. You know, Daniel, I may be teaching you about leadership, but you're teaching me something too. What's that? Daniel asked, curiosity lighting up his face. Mr. Carter looked out at the vibrant, bustling community center in the distance. You're reminding me of the joy of making a difference. In business, it's easy to get caught up in profits and success, but seeing you grow, seeing this community change, it's given me a new perspective on what truly matters. Daniel nodded, understanding the weight of his words. They sat in silence for a moment, both soaking in the gravity of what they were building together. The impact of Daniel's simple act of honesty continued to ripple through the neighborhood. The once struggling area began to transform. The community center, Daniel's place, became a beacon of hope, a hub of learning, creativity, and connection. Kids who once had nowhere to go now had a safe space to study, play, and dream. Adults attended job training workshops. Families gathered for community events. The neighborhood was changing, and at the heart of it all was Daniel, a boy whose simple act of kindness had sparked a movement.